3 days after my daughter's wedding, I received a thick stack of legal documents from her new husband. He called it a family financial plan, but I, a 63-year-old widow living alone in a quiet suburban home, knew it was a trap. What Brandon Cole didn't know was that I was holding $7 million and no one in the world knew it, not even my daughter. If you want to know what I did next, like this post, comment with the city you're viewing from, so I know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere. I have thought about where the story really begins, and I keep coming back to the same moment. Not the wedding, not the documents, not even the first time I looked at Brandon Cole and felt something cold move through me that I couldn't name. It begins earlier than all of that. It begins the morning my husband died. Gerald Parker passed on a Tuesday in late October, 6 years before any of this happened. He died quietly, the way he had lived, without fuss, without drama, in a hospital bed with the blinds half open, and afternoon light falling across the floor in long, pale strips. I held his hand. I told him things I had been meaning to say for years. And when it was over, I drove home alone, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall for a very long time. I did not know, in those first weeks of grief, that Gerald had spent the last decade of his life quietly building something. He had always been careful with money, not in a miserly way, but in the way of a man who grew up with nothing and never forgot what nothing felt like. He worked. He saved. He invested slowly and patiently, the way people used to before everyone decided that getting rich had to be fast or it wasn't worth doing. And when he died, he left behind an estate that stunned even our attorney, Martin Reeves, who had known Gerald for 30 years, $7,200,000. Martin sat across from me in his office, the papers laid out between us on the dark oak desk, and he watched my face the way people watch someone open a door. They're not sure leads somewhere safe. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "I want to make sure you understand the full picture." I understood it. I just didn't know what to do with it. I went home and I didn't tell anyone. Not Lily, not my sister Carol in Phoenix, not the neighbors I had coffee with on Thursday mornings. I paid off the house. I set up the accounts the way Martin advised. I kept living the same quiet life I had always lived. The same small grocery runs, the same modest dinners, the same sensible car in the driveway. And I kept the secret folded inside me like a letter I wasn't ready to send. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't cunning, not at first. It was fear. I had watched what money did to people, the way it rearranged relationships, the way it made everyone you loved suddenly uncertain about their own motives. I was 63 years old and I had just lost my husband, and I was not ready to also lose the simplicity of knowing who loved me and why. So I said nothing, and the months became years, and life went on. And then Lily met Brandon. My daughter was 31 when she brought him home for the first time. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice doing that thing it did when she was trying to sound casual about something she was actually very excited about. A little too even, a little too controlled. "I'm seeing someone, Mom. I'd like you to meet him. His name is Brandon Cole." I said all the right things. I was happy for her. I meant it. She had been alone for 3 years after her last relationship ended badly, and I had watched her rebuild herself with the kind of quiet determination that made me proud and broke my heart at the same time. Lily was not a person who fell easily. She was careful. She was thoughtful. She had her mother's instinct for reading people, or so I believed. Brandon Cole arrived on a Saturday afternoon carrying a bottle of wine and a smile that was just slightly too practiced. He was 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of surface confidence that reads as warmth until you look at it a second time and realize you can't find the warmth underneath the performance. He shook my hand. He complimented my garden. He asked questions about Gerald. How long had we been married? What had he done for work? What was he like? And I answered all of them without thinking much about it. Because in the moment, the questions seemed like the natural curiosity of a man trying to understand the family he was hoping to join. It was only later, driving home that night and replaying the conversation in the quiet of my car, that I realized every question Brandon had asked about Gerald circled back, one way or another, to money. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself I was a grieving widow with a habit of suspicion, projecting old fears onto a man my daughter loved. I made myself a cup of tea and I went to bed and I slept badly, and I didn't say anything to anyone. 6 months later, Lily told me they were engaged. Tint. The wedding was beautiful, in the way that weddings always are. All that hope and white fabric and flowers arranged just so. Everyone smiling and pretending that two people can promise forever without any of them knowing what forever costs. Lily was radiant. I will not take that away from her, not even now, looking back. She was genuinely happy. She believed in him, and standing there in that garden venue with the late May sun coming down soft and golden, watching my daughter walk toward a man I wasn't sure I trusted, I made myself be still. I made myself smile. I told myself that love was her risk to take and not mine to manage. I held it together through the ceremony, through the reception, through the toasts and the first dance, and the moment when Lily hugged me so hard, I felt it in my bones and whispered, "I'm so happy, Mom. I'm so happy." "I know, baby," I said, and I held her, and I kept my face against her hair so she couldn't see mine. 3 days later, Brandon Cole came to my house alone. It was a Wednesday morning, around 10 o'clock. I was in the kitchen, hands still dusty with flour from a pie crust I was making for no particular reason, except that baking helped me think. The doorbell rang, and when I opened the door and found him standing on my porch, dressed in a collared shirt like he'd come from somewhere important, holding a manila envelope with both hands, I felt that cold thing move through me again. The same thing I had felt the very first time I met him and hadn't been able to name. I could name it now. "Evelyn," he said and smiled, "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Brandon," I stepped back. "Come in." He came in and looked around my house the way he always did, that slow assessing sweep that he dressed up as admiration. "Lovely place," he said. "You've really made it feel like home." "Gerald and I lived here for 27 years, I said. "Can I get you some coffee?" "Please." I made the coffee. I moved slowly. I kept my hands steady. By the time I set the cups on the kitchen table and sat down across from him, he was already pulling papers from the envelope, arranging them in a neat stack between us, his movements smooth and deliberate, like a man who had rehearsed this moment. "Lily and I have been talking," he began, "about getting our financial house in order. Now that we're married, we want to be intentional. Think about the future, us, our future and yours." He paused and looked at me with an expression designed to communicate warmth. "You're family now, Evelyn. We want to make sure everyone is protected." I looked at the papers. They were dense with legal language, the kind of language that sounds formal and responsible until you read it slowly enough to understand what it's actually asking for. What it was asking for was a lot. "Take your time," Brandon said. "There's no rush." I read carefully. The documents were cleverly constructed, not crude, not obvious. There were several layers to what he was proposing: a family trust structure, the assignment of financial powers of attorney, provisions for the management of assets in the interest of long-term family stability. The language was professional. It had been drafted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Buried in the middle of page 7 was a clause that would have given Brandon Cole, upon Evelyn Parker's signature, co-signatory authority over any accounts or assets held in my name exceeding $50,000 in value. I read it twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Then I set the papers down and wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and looked at him. "This is very thorough," I said. "We want to be responsible," he said. He was watching me carefully now, trying to read whether he'd won or lost. "Where did you have this drafted?" A slight pause. "A firm I've worked with before. Very reputable." "I'm sure." I nodded slowly. "Brandon, I appreciate the thought, truly, but I'd like to have my own attorney look these over before I sign anything. I'm old-fashioned that way." Something moved across his face, quick and gone, like a shadow. "Of course," he said. "That makes complete sense." He gathered the papers back into the envelope with the same careful deliberateness he'd taken them out with. We finished our coffee. He asked me how the pie was coming along. He kissed my cheek at the door and told me to give Lily his love, and then he walked down my porch steps and got into his car and drove away. I stood in the doorway until I couldn't see his car anymore. Then I went inside, picked up the phone, and called Martin Reeves. "Yeah, tell me everything," Martin said. "Start from the beginning." Martin was 70 years old and had been practicing law since before I was born. He was the kind of attorney who didn't perform confidence. He simply had it, worn smooth and quiet like stone in a riverbed. Gerald had trusted him completely. I trusted him with my life. I described the documents as precisely as I could. Martin listened without interrupting, making the occasional small sound that meant he was following. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "He had those professionally drafted," Martin said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. That's not an impulse move, Evelyn. That's premeditated." "I know." "Do you know what he thinks you have?" "I don't know exactly, but he's been asking questions about Gerald since the beginning. I think he's been trying to piece things together for months." I paused. "Martin, I haven't told anyone about the inheritance, not even Lily." Another silence, longer this time. "Does he know that?" "He knows I'm a widow living modestly. He probably assumes I have something. He doesn't know how much." I looked out the window at the empty driveway. "I'd like to keep it that way." Martin was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I do anything at all. And I'm thinking that the best way to understand a trap is to make it look like it's working." There was a long pause. Then Martin made a sound that, in 30 years of knowing him, I had learned to recognize as the sound of him deciding to do something he found ethically interesting. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," he said. "Bring everything you remember about those documents. We need to talk this through properly. I'll be there at 9. Evelyn," his voice was careful, "be very sure you want to go down this road. Once you start something like this—" "Martin," I said, "he married my daughter. If he's what I think he is, she is at risk. That is not something I am capable of ignoring." He didn't argue with that. That night, I sat at the kitchen table where Gerald and I had eaten 10,000 meals together, where Lily had done her homework as a child, where I had drunk coffee and planned nothing more complicated than a grocery list for most of my adult life, and I tried to be honest with myself about what I felt. I was afraid. Not of Brandon. Not exactly. Of what it would cost if I was right about him. Of what it would cost my daughter. Of the look on Lily's face when the thing she believed in turned out to be something else entirely. I was also angry. A cold, settled anger that surprised me with its clarity. I had buried a husband. I had spent 6 years living quietly and carefully and keeping my private life to myself. And 3 days after my daughter's wedding, a man with a practiced smile and a manila envelope full of legal language had come to my kitchen table and tried to take something from me. I thought about Gerald, about the discipline and patience it had taken him to build what he'd built. About the morning I'd sat in Martin's office and understood for the first time that my husband had spent 30 years thinking about my future, building something he wouldn't live to see me use. No, I thought. Not this. Not him. I washed my coffee cup. I turned off the kitchen light. I went upstairs and lay in the dark for a long time, listening to the house settle around me, and I made myself a promise. Whatever Brandon Cole was planning, he would not be the one who won. Martin's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown that had been there since 1962 and still smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. I arrived at 9 sharp. His assistant, a young woman named Dara, brought us both coffee without being asked, and then closed the door quietly behind her, which meant Martin had already told her this was a private meeting. He was behind his desk, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he looked at me the way he'd been looking at me for 30 years, with the direct, assessing patience of a man who had no interest in wasting either of our time. "Sit down, Evelyn." I sat. "I've been thinking about this since we spoke yesterday. Before we discuss any strategy, I need you to tell me what you believe his endgame is, not what you suspect. What you believe." I thought about it carefully. I believe he married Lily at least in part because he thought there was money in this family. I believe he's been gathering information about Gerald, about me, about what we might have, for months. The documents he brought were a test. He wanted to see whether I would sign without pushback, or whether I'd hesitate. I folded my hands in my lap. He wasn't expecting me to know what I was reading. "That's the mistake amateurs make," Martin said. "They design something clever and then they assume the other person won't understand it. He thinks I'm a sweet old widow who bakes pies. And what do you want to do about that?" I told him. Martin listened to the whole thing without expression, which was the way he listened to things he was seriously considering. When I finished, he took off his reading glasses entirely, set them on the desk, and looked at me directly. "You want to fabricate financial records," he said. "I want to create a version of my financial picture that is technically accurate in some respects and strategically incomplete in others. I want him to believe I have something worth pursuing, but something much smaller than the truth. Modest enough that he relaxes. Not so small that he loses interest. And the purpose?" "The purpose," I said, "is to give him enough rope to keep pulling while I watch where the rope leads. If he's willing to manipulate a stack of documents to get at what he thinks is a modest inheritance, what will he be willing to do when he thinks there's real money involved?" Martin was quiet for a long time. "Evelyn," he finally said, "if Brandon is as deliberate as you believe he is, he will keep pushing. This won't stay at the level of paperwork. He'll find other angles, other pressure points. I know. Lily is the most obvious one." The word hit me the way he meant it to. "I know," I said again. My voice stayed even. "It cost something. Then you understand that this plan carries real risk. Not to you financially. Your accounts are structured in ways he can't easily access without your active cooperation. But to your relationship with your daughter. If he uses her, that's exactly what I'm afraid of," I said. "And it's exactly why I can't do nothing." I leaned forward slightly. "Martin, if I go to Lily right now, today, and tell her what I suspect, she will not believe me. She's been with him for over a year. She's in love. She's 3 days into her marriage. She will think I'm a jealous, overprotective mother trying to sabotage her happiness." I paused. And maybe part of her would be right to wonder. Because right now, all I have is a feeling and a manila envelope. I need proof. Real proof. The kind she cannot argue with. Martin picked up his reading glasses again. He turned them over once in his hands. Then he set them back down and said, "I know a forensic accountant I trust completely. Very discreet. I'll want her involved." I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He looked at me seriously. "One condition. Everything goes through me. You don't act independently. You don't make moves without telling me. If this goes sideways, I need to be able to protect you, and I can only do that if I know what you're doing." "Agreed. And Evelyn," he held my eyes, "I need you to be prepared. There's a reasonable chance that when this is over, Lily will be hurt, badly. And some portion of that hurt, no matter how carefully we handle it, is going to land on you." I looked at him steadily. "I know." "You're sure?" "She's my daughter," I said. "I have been sure about her for 31 years. That doesn't stop because it's going to hurt." He nodded once, and that was that. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went about my ordinary days, the grocery runs, the coffee mornings, the slow domestic rhythms of a retired widow, while underneath all of it, Martin and his forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Paula Chen, were working quietly to build a picture that didn't quite exist. The fabricated records were, technically speaking, not fabrications. They were a legitimate snapshot of a subset of my finances, the smaller, more visible accounts, the modest investment portfolio that had always been the public face of my money, the image I had always projected because it matched the life I was actually living. What they omitted was everything else. Martin drafted a summary letter on his firm's letterhead that any reasonable person reviewing it would take as a complete accounting of my assets. It listed a total figure of $340,000. Not nothing, but not what Brandon was hoping for either. We mailed a copy to a P.O. box Martin had registered with Brandon Cole listed as the authorized recipient. The cover letter explained that this was sent in response to his inquiry about the family estate per his attorney's recent correspondence with the Parker family. There had been no such correspondence, but there would be now. Martin had contacts, careful, professional contacts. He knew how to make a paper trail look real. We waited. It took 4 days. On the 5th morning, Lily called me. Her voice was doing the too even thing again, but this time there was something underneath it that wasn't excitement. Something thinner, more careful. "Mom," she said, "Brandon was wondering if you'd had a chance to think more about the family planning documents he dropped off." I kept my voice warm and slightly vague. "Oh, honey, I've had my attorney take a look. Tell Brandon I'll be in touch next week. We're just reviewing a few things." A brief pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. How are you two settling in?" She let me change the subject, but the call sat uneasily with me long after we'd said goodbye, because I knew, the way you know things about a person you've loved since the moment they were born, that Lily had not made that phone call on her own initiative. She had been asked to make it. Brandon was already working every angle he had, and I had the terrible, clarifying realization, standing in my kitchen with the phone still warm in my hand, that whatever he was planning, it had been planned for a long time. The pie sat cooling on the counter. Outside, the late afternoon light was going amber and long across the yard. My husband had planted the oak tree in the corner of the garden the year Lily was born. It was enormous now, all these decades later, and it threw a long shadow across the lawn. I looked at it for a moment. Then I picked up the phone and called Martin. "It's moving faster than I expected," I said. "Tell me," he said. And I did. Martin picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been expecting me to call. "He moved through Lily," I said, without preamble. "That phone call this morning. He put her up to it. I'd bet my life on it." "I'd say that's a reasonable bet." Martin's voice was measured, but I knew him well enough to hear what lived underneath it. He was concerned. "How did Lily sound?" "Careful, like she was reading from something she'd half memorized and was trying to make sound natural." "Did she seem aware of what she was doing?" That was the question I hadn't wanted to sit with, and Martin knew it. "I don't think so. I think she believed she was just checking in on her mother." I paused. "Which makes it worse, doesn't it? He's using her without her knowing she's being used." "That's how people like him operate," Martin said. "They don't ask for help. They arrange things so that the help happens automatically." He was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn, I need you to be very careful about how you handle Lily going forward. Don't pull away from her. That's what he'll want. If you become distant, she'll feel it and she'll tell him, and he'll use that too. Stay warm, stay present. Give him nothing to work with." "I understand. Paula has finished the initial review of the fabricated records package. She's satisfied it will read as authentic to anyone who isn't specifically looking for gaps. We're ready to let it sit in front of him. And then we watch." "And then we watch," he agreed. "Get some sleep, Evelyn. This is going to take longer than either of us would like." I did not, in fact, get much sleep. I lay in bed that night listening to the oak tree move in the wind outside and thinking about Lily, about the way she had sounded on the phone, that thin, careful note under her voice, and about how many times in her life I had heard her try to be someone's peacemaker without understanding she was being positioned to play that role. She had done it as a child, stepping carefully between her father and me during the few real arguments Gerald and I ever had, offering tea, changing the subject, smoothing things over with the 11-year-old's fragile diplomacy. She had always wanted everyone to be okay. It was one of the things I loved most about her, and one of the things that frightened me most now, under these circumstances. People who need everyone to be okay are very easy to manipulate. All you have to do is make them believe that their compliance is what's keeping the peace. I understood, lying there in the dark, that Brandon Cole had read my daughter with precision. He called me himself 4 days later. I was in the garden when my phone rang, kneeling in the dirt with my gardening gloves on, pulling up the last of the autumn-bloomed marigolds that had gone dry and brown at the edges. It was the kind of gray November afternoon that smells like cold earth and coming rain, and I almost didn't answer. Then I saw the name on the screen, and I sat back on my heels and took one slow breath before I picked up. "Brandon," I said pleasantly. "What a nice surprise." "Evelyn?" His voice was warm, easy, perfectly calibrated. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Just some garden cleanup. What can I do for you? I wanted to check in personally. I know Lily reached out earlier this week, and I just wanted to make sure you didn't feel any pressure around the documents. We really are in no rush. A brief, well-timed pause. I also wanted to say, and I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, that I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about what it must be like managing everything on your own. I want you to know that Lily and I consider ourselves your family. We want to carry some of that weight. It was a beautiful performance. I would have believed it if I hadn't been looking for the bones underneath it. That means a great deal to me, I said, and I put just enough warmth into it to sound real without overdoing it. I've had my attorney take a look at everything, and I think we're getting close to a place where I'll be comfortable. There are just a few questions about the asset structure. Nothing dramatic. Of course. Another pause. Shorter this time, a fraction tighter. Did your attorney have specific concerns? I'd be happy to have our people connect, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Our people. He said it so naturally, like it was simply a matter of coordination between equals. Like the documents he'd brought to my kitchen table were a routine administrative matter rather than a legal maneuver designed to give him access to my money. Oh, I don't want to make it complicated, I said mildly. These things always take a little time. You know how attorneys are. He laughed at that, an easy, practiced laugh. I do. Take all the time you need. And Evelyn, I mean it about being family. Lily loves you more than anything. We both want you to feel safe and looked after. You're very kind, I said. Give Lily my love. I hung up and sat there in the cold garden for a long moment with dirt on my gloves and my heart beating hard in a way I hadn't quite expected. Not from fear. From fury. The contained, icy kind that had nowhere to go yet. He had used the word safe. He wanted me to feel safe and looked after, he had said, while in his other hand he was holding documents designed to remove my financial autonomy entirely. The audacity of it was almost architectural. He had built something, this man. Something constructed very carefully over a long period of time, and now he was running his hand over the surface of it to make sure there were no rough edges showing. I called Martin before I'd even stood up from the garden. He called me directly, I said. He's checking whether the attorney review is going to be a real obstacle or a polite delay. What did you tell him? That we're almost comfortable, that there are a few questions about asset structure. I pulled one glove off and pressed my bare hand against the cold ground for a second, grounding myself. Martin, he offered to have his people connect with my people. He wants to know who he's dealing with. Then we give him something to look at. Martin's voice shifted. That slight brightening that meant he was moving into the part of his work he was genuinely good at. I'll have Dara set up a preliminary call between our offices next week. Nothing substantive, just enough to establish that the review is legitimate and that the asset picture we've created is the one they're working from. And then we wait for him to make his next move. Because he will, Evelyn. Men like Brandon don't hold still. Every day that passes without a signature is a problem for them. He'll find another angle. He was right. He found one in less than 2 weeks. I had lunch with Lily on a Thursday at a small Italian place downtown that we'd been going to together since she was in her mid-20s. It was one of those places that hadn't changed in decades. The same red check tablecloths, the same owner behind the counter, the same laminated menus with the same handwritten specials board. Lily and I had the booth in the back corner that we always asked for, and for the first half of the meal, it was fine. Better than fine. She told me about the apartment she and Brandon were fixing up, about a promotion she was being considered for at the architecture firm where she'd worked for the past 3 years, about a weekend trip they were planning in the spring. She was animated and bright, and I watched her face and listened to her voice and reminded myself, carefully and deliberately, that she was not the enemy. She was never the enemy. She was the thing I was trying to protect. It was over coffee that her voice shifted. "Mom?" she said, and the brightness went down a few degrees. "Brandon mentioned that you've been working with your attorney on the family planning documents." "I have," I said. "Martin takes his time. You know that." "I know." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "He also mentioned, and I hope this doesn't sound weird, that the review is taking a little longer than expected, and he was wondering if maybe there's something specific that's making you uncomfortable. Like something you didn't want to say to him directly." I looked at my daughter, at the careful peacemaking set of her face, at the way she was trying to build a bridge between two sides of something she didn't fully understand. "Lily," I said gently, "why is Brandon asking you to ask me this?" She blinked. He's not asking me to ask you. He just mentioned it, and I thought," "Sweetheart," I kept my voice soft. "He mentioned it to you because he knew you'd bring it up to me. He's not wrong that it works. Look, here we are, having the conversation he wanted us to have." Something moved across her face. Not quite offense, not quite recognition either. Something in between, uneasy and searching. "That's not fair, Mom." "Maybe not," I said. "I'm not saying it to criticize him. I'm just noticing the pattern." I reached across and touched her hand briefly. Everything is fine with the documents. It's simply taking the time it takes. Will you tell him that for me? She said she would, but her eyes were quieter for the rest of the lunch, and I drove home with the weight of what I hadn't said pressing down on the back of my chest. He was threading her through every conversation, every inquiry, every pressure point, every attempt to move me faster. It all passed through Lily first. She was the softest route to me, and he had mapped that from the beginning. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and I wrote down everything I had observed since the day he'd come to my door with that envelope. The phone call through Lily, his direct call to me, the offer to connect our attorneys, the lunch conversation he had engineered without being in the room. I wrote it all down and I looked at it for a long time, and then I called Martin. I want to move to the next phase, I said. Tell me what you're thinking. I want to give him what he thinks he wants. I want the documents signed, a version of them. A version you've reworked so that it appears to give him co-signatory access to the smaller accounts we've listed in the fabricated records. Something that looks like a win for him. I paused. And while he's focused on that, I want to see what he actually does with it. Martin was quiet for a moment. You understand that involves a controlled risk. I understand, but Martin, he's not going to stop pushing through Lily. Every time he does, it costs her something. Every time she carries a message she doesn't know she's carrying, it erodes something between us. I need him to think he's won enough to get careless. Give me a few days to draft something, Martin said. Something that looks real but isn't. How long until we have it ready? End of next week. Evelyn, he paused. Once you sign anything, even something constructed the way I'm describing us in, the dynamic changes. He'll feel the shift. He'll get bolder. That's the point, I said. He sighed, not unhappily, more like a man settling into something he had decided to see through. End of next week, he said. I'll call you. Tas. The modified documents were, in Martin's words, a masterpiece of careful ambiguity. They gave Brandon exactly what he appeared to want, co-signatory authority over the accounts listed in the fabricated financial summary, while concealing the fact that those accounts held a combined total of just under $12,000, spread across 3 minor savings accounts that I had opened years ago and rarely used. The language was real. The authority he would hold was real. What wasn't real was the picture he had of what those accounts contained. I signed them in Martin's office on a Friday afternoon, with Martin watching and Paula Chen as a witness, and then I went home and made dinner and sat by the window in the gathering dark and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The following Monday morning, Martin called me at 7:45. We have movement, he said. Paula Chen had been monitoring the accounts, legally, with full authorization. Overnight on Sunday, someone had made 2 attempts to access account information using login credentials that were not mine. The attempts had not succeeded because Martin had worked with the bank's security division in advance to flag any access attempts from unrecognized devices and require secondary verification. But the attempts had been logged, time-stamped, documented. Someone with access to your account details and your partial login information tried to get in, Martin said. This wasn't a random intrusion. This was targeted. He knew the account numbers, I said. The documents. He had the documents now. He knew enough to attempt access, not enough to complete it. Martin paused. Evelyn, account details at this level of specificity don't come from guessing. They come from someone who's seen the documents directly or had them described in detail. I sat very still. Lily has a copy, I said quietly. Brandon had insisted when the paperwork was finalized that Lily receive a copy for their household records. I had not objected at the time because objecting would have looked suspicious. She has a copy of everything. Martin didn't say anything for a moment. He didn't need to. She didn't do it on purpose, I said. My voice was steady, but it cost me. She wouldn't. She doesn't even understand what the documents mean. Not fully. I know, Martin said. But she may have shared information without realizing what she was sharing. Or he may have accessed her copy without telling her. Either way, the information had moved from Lily's hands into whatever Brandon was doing with it. Either she had passed it along trustingly, without understanding what she was providing, or he had taken it from her. Both possibilities were awful in different ways, and I sat with that for several long minutes after I hung up, alone in my kitchen in the early morning light, trying to hold the shape of what I was feeling without letting it break me. Because what I was feeling was this. My daughter was already deeper inside this than I had let myself believe. And Brandon Cole was not a man who made small plans. He had tried to access my accounts 4 days after getting the documents. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't waited. He had simply moved, immediately and without apparent conscience, the moment he thought the door was open. I thought about all the months he had spent having dinner at my table, asking careful questions about Gerald, complimenting my garden. I thought about the way he had kissed my cheek at the door and told me to give Lily his love. I thought about the phone call where he had told me he wanted me to feel safe. And then I thought about what Martin had said the very first day we had sat down together to talk about all of this. Men like Brandon don't hold still. No, they didn't. They moved fast and quiet, and they didn't stop until something stopped them. I pulled out my phone and I opened my text to Lily and I typed, "Thinking of you today, sweetheart. Love you." And I stared at it for a second before I sent it, because it was true, and also because it was all I could safely say, and the gap between those two things was wide enough to fall into. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, "Love you too, Mom. Coffee soon?" "Yes," I typed back. "Soon." I set the phone down on the table. Outside, the oak tree stood still against a pale sky. Somewhere in the city, Brandon Cole was looking at a screen that had told him his access attempt had failed, and he was already deciding what to try next. Whatever it was, I needed to be ready for it before it reached my daughter. The coffee with Lily happened on a Wednesday, 10 days after the failed account access attempt that Martin had documented and I had not yet told anyone about. We met at the same Italian place, same back booth, same laminated menus. But something was different this time, and I felt it the moment Lily sat down across from me. She looked tired. Not the ordinary tired of a busy week. Something deeper, the kind that lives behind the eyes and doesn't lift when you smile. She smiled at me when she sat down, and it was a real smile, but it was working harder than it should have had to. I ordered for both of us without asking, because I knew what she always got, and she let me, which told me she was grateful not to have to make a decision about anything right now, even something as small as soup or salad. "How's the apartment coming?" I asked. "Good. Almost done with the second bedroom." She wrapped both hands around her water glass. "Brandon wants to use it as an office. I was thinking maybe a guest room eventually, but..." She shrugged with one shoulder. "We'll figure it out." I noted the shrug, the trailing off. I noted that she'd said we'll figure it out in the tone people use when they mean he'll decide and I'll adjust, and that she didn't seem to notice the difference. "And work?" I asked. "Good. Really good, actually. The promotion is looking more likely." A genuine brightness came into her face for a moment, the specific brightness that appeared whenever she talked about her work, which she loved cleanly and without complication, the way she loved very few things. "They're giving me the Henderson project. It's a full commercial redesign, probably 18 months of work. It's a big deal." "That's wonderful, Lily." "It is." The brightness faded a little. "Brandon thinks I should maybe not take on something that long right now, given everything we have going on with getting settled." She looked down at her water glass. "He might be right." I kept my face still. "What do you think?" She looked up. "I think I've wanted a project like this for 3 years." "Then I think you know what you want to do," I said carefully. She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The documents. The family planning stuff Brandon brought you." She met my eyes. "Is there a real problem with them, or are you just, I don't know, stalling?" The directness of it surprised me. Not because Lily wasn't capable of directness, but because of the particular shape of the question, the way it was Brandon's concern dressed up in her words, wearing her voice, looking at me through her eyes. "There's no stalling," I said. "Martin is being thorough. That's what I pay him for. Brandon says it's been 2 months. Brandon is right. Good legal review takes time. He's starting to think..." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "What is he starting to think, Lily?" She looked uncomfortable, the way she used to look as a teenager when she'd been put in the middle of something and didn't know how to get out without upsetting someone. "He's starting to think you don't trust him." "I've known your husband for 14 months, I said. "Trust takes longer than 14 months. "He's my husband, Mom. He's family." "I know he is." I reached across and touched her hand. "And I'm working through the documents as carefully and fairly as I can. That's all I can tell you right now." She accepted that because she had to. But the look on her face when she accepted it, that slightly closed, slightly distant look that meant she was deciding not to push further but not agreeing, told me that the conversation hadn't been hers to start and might not be hers to end. I told Martin about it that evening. I told him about the promotion too, about Brandon's suggestion that Lily not take on a long project right now, given everything they had going on. Martin was quiet for a moment. "He's isolating her professionally," he said. "That's what I thought. It's a pattern, Evelyn. Control the finances, manage the social connections, limit professional ambitions. He's narrowing her world. He's been doing it gradually enough that she doesn't feel the walls closing. I already knew it. Hearing it said plainly by someone else made it heavier, not lighter, because it meant it was real, and not just my suspicious mother brain constructing a narrative. Martin, I need to move faster. Whatever we're building, we need to be further along than we are." I agree. Paul has been pulling financial records, his specifically, public records, credit history, anything accessible without a subpoena. He paused. "There are some things you should know." He told me. And what he told me rearranged everything I thought I understood about the timeline of this. Brandon Cole had a financial history that, looked at in pieces, seemed unremarkable. A business venture in his early 30s that had dissolved. A civil dispute with a former business partner that had settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement. Moderate debt. Nothing criminal. But Paula, who had been doing this kind of work for 20 years, had spotted something in the pattern of how the debt had accumulated and the timing of the business dissolution. The former business partner's name was listed in public court filings. She had found him. "He talked to Paula," Martin said. "Off the record, just as a private citizen. His story is..." Let's say it's consistent with someone who believes he was defrauded by a partner who knew exactly how to make things look legitimate right up until they weren't. I sat down. Brandon did the same thing to someone else. We can't prove it. The settlement is sealed, but the shape of it, the way it moved, the way it ended, it looks familiar. Martin let that settle for a moment. Evelyn, this man has done this before. You're not the first. I thought about Lily, about her tired eyes over the water glass, about the project she'd wanted for 3 years, and the husband who thought she should wait. Then we don't have time, I said. We need to give him enough to force the next move. He tried the accounts and it didn't work. He's going to try something else, and the next thing is going to involve Lily more directly. I can feel it. Martin didn't disagree. He said he'd been thinking about the wedding footage. The videographer, I said immediately, because I remembered the young man with the camera at the reception, the one who had been everywhere and nowhere, one of those invisible presences at big events who nobody pays much attention to because cameras at weddings are just part of the furniture. Brandon's side hired him, yes, but we've located the raw footage. All of it. The videographer is a freelancer, and he wasn't under any exclusivity agreement. He's willing to share the complete files. Why would he do that? A pause. Because he was at the cocktail hour with a camera rolling when he probably should have been getting a drink of water, and he recorded something that made him uncomfortable enough that he mentioned it to someone he knew, and that someone knew someone, and eventually it worked its way to Paula's desk. Martin's voice was careful. Evelyn, I want you to be prepared before I tell you what's on it. Tell me, I said. He told me. Brandon had been standing near the bar at the cocktail hour with 2 men from his side of the guest list, men whose names I barely remembered, friends from what he called his business network. The camera had caught them from roughly 15 feet away at a moment when the ambient noise had dropped just enough. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Brandon's voice, relaxed and slightly loosened by champagne, saying, "She's got to be sitting on something real. The old man built for 30 years, and she's living in that house like she's got nothing. There's money there. Once the paperwork clears, we're in a position to find out exactly how much." And then one of the other men, laughing. "So what, you married up?" And Brandon, also laughing. "Let's say I married strategically." I held the phone against my ear, and I didn't say anything for a long time. "Evelyn? I'm here." "I'm sorry," Martin said. And he meant it. I had known this man for 30 years, and I could tell when he meant something. "He said it out loud," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat and even. At the wedding reception, he said it out loud to his friends. He felt safe. He was among people he trusted, at an event that was supposed to be about joy and celebration. He wasn't thinking about cameras. "Nobody ever thinks about the cameras at weddings," I said. Came out almost like a joke. It wasn't. I'm having the footage secured and a clean copy made. Paula is writing up her findings on the prior civil case. Martin pressed me once more to think carefully about the next step, because the next step is Lily, and once I take it, there is no version of this that doesn't hurt her. "I know," I said. "I know." I said it twice because the first time I said it, I wasn't sure I meant it, and the second time I was. I spent 3 days after that call deciding how to tell my daughter what I knew, not whether the weather had been decided the moment I heard that audio described, but how. The how was everything. Lily was not a woman who responded well to being presented with conclusions. She needed to feel like she'd arrived somewhere herself, or the thing she arrived at wouldn't stick. She was stubborn and proud and deeply loyal, and those were wonderful qualities that were, right now, working against both of us. I called her on a Sunday morning and asked if she'd come to the house. "Just the 2 of us," I said. "I want to cook for you." She said yes without hesitating, the way she always did when I offered to cook, and I held on to that. The uncomplicated ease of that yes, like something I was afraid of losing. She came on Sunday afternoon, and I made the pasta she'd loved since she was a child, and we ate at the kitchen table where she had done her homework for 12 years, and for a while it was simply good. She talked about the Henderson project. She had decided to take it, she told me, with a quiet defiance in her voice that made me want to applaud. She'd told Brandon she was doing it. He hadn't been happy, but he'd accepted it. Good girl, I thought. Hold that. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and the kitchen was quiet, I said, "Lily, I need to show you something, and I need you to look at all of it before you say anything." She went very still. I had the documents Martin had prepared laid out on the table. The financial records showing the attempts to access my accounts. Paula's summary of Brandon's prior civil case, stripped of the sealed information, but describing the pattern clearly. And on my laptop, the wedding footage. "Mom," Lily said. Her voice was already defensive, already tightening. "What is this?" "Just look," I said. "Please, look at all of it first." She looked. She read slowly, the way she always read. Carefully, page by page, her eyes moving across every line. I watched her face, and I kept my own face as neutral as I could manage, which was difficult because I loved her, and it was hurting her, right in front of me, in real time, and I had to let it. When she got to the account access report, she stopped. Someone tried to access your accounts? Yes. When? About 6 weeks ago, 4 days after the documents were signed. She looked at the timestamp. She looked at it for a long time. Then I played her the wedding footage. I turned the laptop toward her and I pressed play, and I watched her watch the screen, and I watched the moment it reached the part where Brandon's voice said, "I married strategically," and I watched what happened to her face. She didn't cry. I had expected her to cry. Instead, she went absolutely still. The kind of stillness that is the body's response to something too large to move through. And she sat there with her hands flat on the table and her face doing something complicated and controlled that I recognized because I had been doing it myself for 2 months. She stopped. That's from the reception. Yes? His voice? Yes. She reached out and closed the laptop herself, carefully, like she was putting something away. Then she sat back in her chair. You've had this for how long? I got the call about it a few days ago. I wanted to be sure before I brought it to you. And the account access, you think the account information was in the documents. You had a copy. She flinched. Not a large flinch. Lily was not a large gesture person. But I saw it. You think I gave it to him? I think he may have taken it from you without telling you. I don't think you gave it to him deliberately. Not for a moment. Mom. Her voice cracked slightly on the word, and then she controlled it. I need you to tell me everything you know, from the beginning. So I did. I told her about the first documents and the call to Martin, about the fabricated financial picture, about the modified co-signatory paperwork, about Paula Chen and the prior civil case and the pattern that Paula, with 20 years of experience, had recognized immediately. I told her all of it, holding nothing back. And I watched my daughter absorb it piece by piece with an expression that moved through several different kinds of pain. When I finished, she was quiet for a very long time. You didn't tell me, she finally said. No. You let me carry messages for him. That lunch where I asked you about the attorney review, that was him. I know. You knew it was him and you didn't tell me. Her voice was not accusatory. It was something worse, bewildered, like someone trying to understand a map that kept changing. If I had told you 2 months ago, Lily, what would you have believed? You'd been married for 2 weeks. You were in love. All I had then was a feeling and a set of documents. Would you have believed me? The silence that followed told me she knew the answer. I don't know what to believe right now, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I need to go home. I know. I'm not saying you're wrong. She pushed her chair back and stood. I'm not saying that. I need to think. She hugged me at the door, brief and tight, the way she hugged me when she was holding something too big to put down. I held on for an extra second. Lily, I said, don't tell him what I showed you. Not yet. Please. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were dry and very serious. Why? Because if he knows we know, he becomes unpredictable. Right now, we have the advantage. Please. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once and walked to her car. I stood in the doorway and watched her go, the same way I had stood and watched Brandon go 2 months ago, and the parallel of it sat in my chest like a stone. She called me 4 days later. It was late, after 10, and when I saw her name on the phone, I picked up immediately. Mom. Her voice was different. Something in it had changed. The bewilderment was gone, replaced by something harder and colder, and I knew that tone. I had heard it once before, when she was 19 and discovered that a friend she trusted had lied to her in a way that cost her something real. It was the voice of a person who has stopped hoping they're wrong. Lily, what happened? I went through his computer. A pause. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop thinking about the account access and I thought, I just needed to know. Another pause. Longer. Mom, he has a browser history going back months. Search after search. Trust fund access structures, marital asset laws, inheritance tax loopholes, how to contest a will, financial power of attorney scope. Her voice wavered for just a second and then steadied. He searched my name combined with the word inheritance. He searched your name combined with the words estate value. He did it on our home computer, Mom, in our apartment while I was asleep. I sat down on the edge of the bed and pressed my free hand flat against my knee to keep it from shaking. Lily, I'm not done. She took a breath. There's an email, drafted but never sent, sitting in his drafts folder. It's addressed to someone named R. Whitfield. I don't know who that is. It says he's working on the Parker situation and expects a resolution within the quarter and that the secondary approach through the daughter has been effective but may need to shift to direct pressure if the asset review delays continue. The Parker situation. The secondary approach through the daughter. I closed my eyes. He wrote that, I said. He wrote that in a draft email on your shared home computer. He probably thought I'd never look. Her voice had that exhausted flatness that comes after the worst thing has been confirmed. He was that sure of me. I didn't say anything for a moment, because what was there to say? He had been that sure of her. He had read my daughter, her loyalty, her trust, her need for everyone to be okay. And he had made himself so central to her sense of stability that he had stopped being careful. He had gotten comfortable. He had stopped hiding the bones of the thing because he believed she would never look for them. "What do I do?" Lily asked. Her voice was very small. Not the smallness of weakness, why? The smallness of someone who has just walked into a very large, very dark room and is trying to get their bearings. "You don't do anything yet," I said. "You take screenshots of everything you found. Every search, the email, all of it. You save them somewhere he can't access, and then you call me tomorrow and we go see Martin together." A long silence. "Okay," she said. "Lily?" I needed to say this carefully. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry it's this. I'm sorry I was right." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. Somewhere between the two. "Yeah," she said. "Me too, Mom." After she hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. I had been right. I had known I was right for 2 months. But being right had never felt like this. This particular combination of vindication and grief that sits in you like something broken that can't be unbroken. My daughter had married a man who had looked at her and seen a tool, who had searched her name alongside the word inheritance on a computer in their shared bedroom while she slept 10 feet away. The worst part wasn't the money. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. The worst part was that he had been so sure she would never look. He had underestimated her, the same way he had underestimated me. That was his first real mistake. And I intended to make sure it was also his last. Lily came to Martin's office the next morning with her phone in her hand and dark circles under her eyes that told me she hadn't slept. She had sent me the screenshots the night before, 17 of them, methodical and complete, the way she did everything when she decided to do it. She had not texted Brandon. She had not called him. She had taken the evidence, secured it, and come to her mother. I was proud of her in a way that hurt to feel, because she shouldn't have had to be brave about this. She should have been in her apartment eating breakfast with a man who loved her, planning a spring trip and arguing pleasantly about paint colors for the second bedroom. Instead, she was sitting across from a 70-year-old attorney with a stack of screenshots on her phone, trying to hold herself together in a way that looked like composure, but was actually something thinner and more fragile underneath. Martin reviewed everything without expression. He had the particular stillness of a man who had seen enough human wrongdoing that very little surprised him anymore. But I watched his eyes move across the screenshots, and I saw the moment he reached the draft email, the Parker situation, the secondary approach through the daughter, because his jaw tightened slightly and then released. He set the phone down on the desk and looked at Lily directly. "You found this yourself," he said. "No one directed you to look." "No," Lily said. "It was my own decision." "And you took these screenshots without deleting or altering anything." "I took the screenshots and then I put the computer back exactly where it was. I didn't open the draft email. I didn't touch it. I just photographed the screen." Martin nodded slowly. "Good. That matters." He leaned back slightly. "Lily, I want to make sure you understand what you're looking at. Not the emotional reality of it. I think you understand that clearly enough. The legal reality." He paused. "What your husband attempted to do constitutes, at minimum, fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted financial exploitation. The account access attempt is documented. The drafted communication suggests a coordinated effort involving at least one other party, and the wedding audio," he glanced at me briefly, "combined with everything else, what we have is a pattern of conduct that a court would take seriously." Lily listened to all of it with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still. Then she said, "What are my options?" "Not what are our options. What are my options?" I noticed it and loved her for it. Martin outlined them carefully. She could consult a family law attorney. He had someone in mind, a woman named Carolyn Marsh who was excellent and direct, about the process of dissolution. The marriage was young enough, and the financial entanglement limited enough given the asset structure we had created, that the legal process should be relatively clean if Brandon chose not to fight it. The "if" was the operative word. "He will fight it," I said quietly. "He's not a man who accepts loss." Martin looked at me. "I expect you're right, which is why the next step matters more than any of the ones that came before it." We had 9 days between that morning in Martin's office and what I have come to think of as the meeting. 9 days during which Lily went home to the apartment and continued living her ordinary life, making dinner, going to work, starting the preliminary stages of the Henderson project with a focus I later understood was partly professional and partly a way of having something solid to hold on to, while inside she was carrying a truth she couldn't yet put down or set free. She told me later that those 9 days were the hardest of her life, harder than she expected because she'd assumed that once she knew the truth, it would make everything simpler. It didn't. Knowing what Brandon was didn't make the 3 years she'd spent loving him disappear. It didn't make the wedding photos on the wall easier to look at. It made everything stranger and more painful. This layering of what had been real and what had been performed, and the nearly impossible task of separating them when they had been so carefully woven together. I kept looking at him, she told me later, and trying to find the seam, trying to see where the real person ended and the performance began. And the worst part was I couldn't always find it. There were moments, just ordinary moments, dinner, watching TV, where I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the email was something else. Maybe I misread it. She paused. And then I remembered the wedding footage, the way he said it. I married strategically, and the maybe went away. I understood that. The maybe is the cruelest part of being deceived by someone you love, because your brain will keep trying to give them the benefit of it long past the point where there is no benefit left to give. Brandon, for his part, gave no sign of knowing anything had changed, which was either a testament